Now, going over to the culture part of the podcast, you have Joy Behar claiming that an AR-15 can demolish an animal and making it barely unedible, and therefore you don't need an AR-15. Yes, I know when it comes to logic and Joy Behar, it's kind of like oil and water. Fascinating science experiment. I know they don't teach science in schools these days, or public schools for that matter. Now, if you take water and oil and put it into a glass, you could stir it really, really hard to try to mix it. And you could stir it really, really, really hard for a long time. But at the end of the day, they just do not mix. The same could be said for having a modicum of intelligence and being on The View. Now, I talk about the subject because, from a business perspective, I was going to say, I think they just got canceled. But nevertheless, they have a lot of eyeballs glued to those screens. So it's a huge cultural phenomenon. People tune into The View. Millions of people watch it. I suspect some just for comical amusement, like myself, when I'm looking at these clips. But there are people who are, unfortunately, ill-informed because of the content they put out. So this is her latest statement. And yeah, she's saying the AR-15 would just demolish an animal so to the point where you can't even eat it. And we'll break down how mentally vacuous that is. But, and I do apologize, I know this might hurt your ears to hear her voice because it is not the best voice. And if you do have suggestions for picture-in-picture production software technology, I appreciate the suggestions as I'm trying to make the show better and better so you can actually see it picture-in-picture. And I've tried a couple softwares, but still having some issues with the camera working. I don't know if the camera I did the updates for the drivers, but I'm currently using OBS open source software for the recording technology. And then for the hardware in terms of the camera, I'm using a Razer Hican 4K USB webcam, actually. So if you have suggestions in the comments, I greatly appreciate it. But without further ado, I will play this clip from The View.
We didn't get a chance to weigh in on the topic of what happened in Maine and AR-15s.
Yeah, I would love to see an assault weapons ban. Like President Reagan, I don't believe they're a sport or hunting instrument. It's like shooting fish in a bucket, but that's my
But also, if you shoot with an AR-15, let's say you shoot a deer, you can't eat it. Because you basically demolish
in addition to that, but the hunt is about an actual difficult process, not massacre.
Now, the amount of mentally vacuous statements made in that very short amount of time is actually quite impressive. I'm surprised Guinness World Book hasn't reached out to them because they put so much wrong, blatant lies into such a short amount of time period. I'm actually surprised they're not running to be a politician. Now, again, I don't know. She says shooting fish in a bucket, that other gal. That's not even the metaphor people use. It's shooting fish in a barrel. That's the age-old saying that everyone should know by now. So they even messed up a simple metaphor by getting it by just having it inaccurate. Now, they say an AR-15, it completely destroys the animal. Well, quite the opposite. Because of the bullet size of the AR-15, it's 0.223 in diameter, or if you go by NATO standards and get a little bit bigger, you get 5.56 millimeter. But it's actually, by hunting standards for a deer, quite small. The concern why you actually can't hunt with an AR-15 in a majority of states, I believe right now is 7 or 8 states that allow you to hunt with an AR-15. Well, the reason some of those states do not allow it is because they don't think it's humane, because they don't think the projectile is big enough to cause a deadly shot, so to say, to end the deer's life as painlessly and quickly as possible. So it's actually the opposite of what they're saying on The View, which I know that's not really news. That's what they do every day. But nevertheless, this is an important topic to me since it has to do with the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment. And then having the moronic idea of saying we should have an AR-15 ban, which, again, the United States tried that, and multiple studies by the government itself and third parties show that it had zero effect on mass shootings and crime. And it doesn't address the 800-pound elephant or donkey in the room, or whatever political figure you want to choose. The most morally vacuous and evil things that ever happened in history happens when the government disarms people. Every single time. I know they don't teach history in public schools anymore hardly, but if you are so inclined to read a history book, I highly recommend them. They're fascinating, and you can always learn a thing or two, including myself. But that's when the worst things happen in history. It's when the government is the only one that is armed, and they disarm the populace. And yet, I can't help but think they've never read a history book on The View. You could debate for another time, perhaps, is whether they have the capacity to read or not. I'm not sure. I've never really met them face to face. I've never been on the show. Be a fascinating experience, some might say. But everything they said in that statement was wrong. So let me know in the comments, why are people still tuning in? Is it because they're not doing extra research? I mean, I always recommend watch as many different perspectives and media as you can, because you'll know what the other side is thinking, politically speaking or culturally speaking, and you'll get to know their perspective, what they're trying to push in terms of maybe an agenda or an ideal. And truth be told, you might find you yourself might have some blind spots, as I have through other topics throughout my life, as I've seeked out different perspectives and ideals. So, some of those fascinating things where this particular clip is completely debunked. And it'll be fascinating to see how many average Americans are really going to give in to the made up word or term assault weapon, which was specifically picked after anti-gunners did polls. And they actually asked people, what's the scariest word on this list? And they chose assault rifle because it was the scariest term for the people who are uninformed and don't understand firearm technology or the differences. They tried other terms like sniper rifle and it just wasn't scary enough for the average person. The average person might just see a black rifle and assume it's a full auto, M4. That, unfortunately, is very difficult for most Americans to obtain these days because the NFA or National Firearm Act it's been around for darn near 100 years. But nevertheless, it'll be interesting to see. And of course, they make the age-old statement, oh yeah, this has nothing to do, founding fathers, you don't need an AR-15 for hunting. Which again, we've heard this statement for decades, actually. It's not a new political phrase or a new cultural idea when it comes to disarming Americans in the Second Amendment. But again, read anything by the founding fathers. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting. I can't believe it's 2023 and we were still reiterating that. Again, perhaps that's why they don't teach history in public schools, because if people actually read documents by the founding fathers, they would see how moronic some of these statements are. But nevertheless, let me know in the comments, do you think will this clip inspire more people to maybe seek out new data? Do the people who watch the video, will they maybe start to raise their eyebrows and think, some of this just sounds too ridiculous. It can't be true. Let me do a little research on my own. I truly hope everyone does more research at the end of the day, but it'll be interesting to see. As I always say, time shall tell. Thank you everyone for taking the time to tune in today. Again, I'm trying to get to 4,000 subscribers by the end of November, so if you could click that button, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, leaving a comment is a great way to let me know what I could be doing better, or just sharing your appreciation with how I'm currently doing things. But I'm always looking to improve the show, so critique is always appreciated. Lastly, don't forget to take the time to tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe, fight the good fight.